Listeners note, this podcast pertains to mental health and addiction issues. You should know that we are not medical professionals and recognize that you may be suffering or know someone suffering with mental health or addiction issues. If that is the case, please contact the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration 24/7 hotline at 1-800-662-HELP. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of White Knuckling It Through Life. I'm Leslie Dilbeck. My co-host, Diane Cohen, is on vacation for Thanksgiving. I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving with those that they hold close to them. I'm super excited about this episode as we finish sharing our journey through mental health issues and struggling with those with a story from my own daughter that is hopeful and has just the best outlook on life and has overcome so much. And I'm super excited to be able to share with you our story, which has been a long time coming, right, Dania?
Yes.
Yeah, we've talked about using our story and sharing it to help other people. And that's really what this podcast is all about helping people through their own life struggles with a message of hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that you don't have to be alone going through these struggles, and that sometimes sharing the story you have might free you, but might empower other people to get help or to know that they can have someone on their side to walk alongside with them through their journey. And so last episode, I shared the end of my story as a parent of somebody suffering from mental illness and how we worked through that and the dynamics that took place in our relationship, mother and daughter, and also my husband, and what that did to the family dynamic. I shared with you how another family was so pivotal in Dania's healing process. And I want you to be able to go back and listen to that recording if you haven't listened to it, and listen to the first episode, just so that you're on the same page of where we're at today with our story. So Dania, I want to have you give us a little bit of your background, how old you are, what you do for a living, what you want to be able to do with your future and those types of things. So go ahead and just give us a little bit of mini bio, if you will.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Dania, and I am 24 years old, and currently I am working as a paraeducator in a high school special ed class. It is absolute fun always, and stays exciting. I hope to continue my career in that direction. I don't know exactly if that looks like teaching or working in a career center for adults with special needs. So yeah, that's kind of the direction that I'm heading now.
Excellent. That is well suited for you. I know you on such a personal level. So I know that you have such a great ability to tap into those students you work with that have special needs, that you always find something that sparks them, that excites them. And I love when you come home. You don't really come home to our house anymore. Sometimes on your drive home from work, you'll tell me your stories from your day, and they're just, they warm my heart. And that's one of the pieces as a parent, and having walked through some of our struggles together, I see you pouring yourself into other people, even though you have your own challenges. So let's kind of go backwards a bit. I shared my perspective of what we went through when you discovered that you were sick and how we managed that. And you've listened to those episodes, and we've really talked at length about what's safe and not safe to talk about. And I, first of all, want to thank you so much, because what you're doing by coming on here is being, one, vulnerable, and we talked about that in our last episode, and knowing that there's some stigma attached to mental health issues and challenges with that. And it's just so brave and courageous of you. So I thank you for the gift that you're giving me, but also to others that might be listening to this. So can you just kind of go back in time several years back and tell us what you struggled with, how you knew you were sick, what things you did to try and mitigate I guess, I don't know, bombs that were being put in front of you with what you were struggling with. So if you can go ahead and dive into that, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think when I really look at like where my struggles really began, I think it starts even as young as like when I was a kid, like probably 9 or 10 years old. I remember like having big emotions and not really knowing what to do with those. And oftentimes it would be in the form of like lashing out or like having a tantrum of sorts. Um, and I think I like recognized that growing up, like, oh, I have like really big emotions that don't necessarily match the situation. Um, but it wasn't really an issue like that, impaired my life until I went to college and I was on my own. Um, and I think in college, like I struggled with, moving away. That's a big change. There's a lot of transition, which I mean, I do not do well with change or transition ever. It's not something that is a strength of mine. But going off to college was difficult because I, didn't have the same support system that I had at home. And I think eventually that started to take a toll on my mental health. Um, there were some incidents that happened at college that I think like caused me to feel more paranoid. And I did notice that as like the major change that caused me to even go into the doctor in the first place was the paranoia. So I felt like people were watching me or that people were following me a lot. I couldn't sleep, and I noticed that like created a pattern of just like insomnia for days on end. And as I lost sleep, I became more depressed, and it just kind of was a landslide snowball of, negative emotions and feelings that had me feeling really terrible at college. And that's what I could name was like, I don't feel right. And I went to the doctor and I did get diagnosed with, some mental health issues. And that's when I started taking medication, and the process of taking medication and like figuring out what works for you is such a long one. They didn't get it right the first 10 times even, um, and for every medication you take, you get 5 new side effects. So I would take one that would cause me to have insomnia even worse than I had before, but it helped with, my depression. And then I'd have to take another one to help with my insomnia and my anxiety because the one that helped with my depression wasn't helping that part. And then on top of it, I'd have to take a mood stabilizer to keep me balanced on those 2 different medications. And so the the time that I was doing that, like I was still going to school, it was just very difficult. I felt very exhausted. And looking back, like I kind of wish I had just taken a break when I had been diagnosed so that way I could take some time to adjust and figure out what I need, but yeah, I came home for summer and I remember being exhausted all summer, just trying to figure out what would work. And
I remember, is that the summer we went to Hawaii? We went on vacation
we went to Hawaii. That
and
was that was in the spring.
Yeah, you wanted to sleep.
I couldn't stay awake. Like, like when you're driving late at night and your eyes just feel so heavy or, your body just feels like it's dragging. Like I felt like that constantly. And I could sleep for 11 hours or I could sleep for 17 and it wouldn't make a difference on how tired I was. And so that time was just super difficult. And I could say that it gave me a sense of hopelessness because I felt like I was feeling worse taking medication than I felt when I was just sick, you know? Um, and as I went back to college, I mean, it was very quick that I realized that I was not going to make it to the end of the year. Um, After the summer, I went back in August, and by October, I felt like I couldn't do it. I think I was overscheduling myself, and I wasn't addressing what I actually needed and making the accommodations that I needed for my mental health. I think that the stigma of mental health in that college was really difficult for me to deal with as well, because it was seen as like a fault in my spirituality. So I did call it quits in October, and I came home for a uh long period of recovery, really. I mean, years and years of kind of just figuring out what works for me. So I moved in with my mom and my dad. And they did set out a list of rules, and I felt already like I had not a lot of control over what was happening. um and I will say that I did have a sense of failure, which is like something that I've been working on my entire time of getting better, is that belief, like, oh, like I'm a failure, which, not true.
I think we all
Yeah,
wear that moniker on us. We're our own worst critic. And when
yeah,
we see that, oh, we didn't complete the end game, that equates to us as failure. But you have a really great lens that you look at it through now. I mean, you've been able to embrace it not as failure, but as miniature progress in your story,
right. Absolutely. I I I even like explain it as, you can stay stagnant, or you can try and you can fail and be stagnant anyways. There's not really any going super, like, you can't go far backwards from where you started when you make an attempt at something. And so I left college. I did. And then I came home and I started getting help for what I needed. I started a program that like I went to every day. We talked about different ways to cope with life, ways to deal with difficult people, ways to deal with your own negative thoughts. And at the time, I was struggling with like suicidal ideation. Like, I did not want to live. And I honestly felt like it was the easy way out. And I remember, like, I had a psychologist just sit me down and be like, it's not an option. And she was like, just if you think about it, just remind yourself it's not even an option, And so I started taking that like seriously. So anytime I'd have like a thought that was like, harmful, I'd just be like, no, like, don't even acknowledge, like, just, we're not going to even engage with that. Like, let it go. Yeah. So that kind of helped me with suicidal ideation and getting out of that, just by kind of considering it as like not an option. And through that time, like, we had struggles at home. Obviously, we did share that. There was a lot of conflict, and I would say that's on my part. I think that I was pushing back on the rules because I felt like I wanted to grasp at any control that I could possibly have, in a time where I felt like I had no control. And so small things that took away control from me felt a lot bigger than they actually were. I remember like getting into like nearly a screaming match with you or dad about going and getting frozen yogurt. And just being like, well, it's the only control I have like over anything. Like, can you just take me to go get frozen yogurt? And that was a hard time because I think like when I just wanted something small, and like, so those things felt a lot bigger than they were in
But
the moment.
can I interject? Like, one of the things you said was that the conflict was all on you. You own that or whatever. But I disagree. I do think like I think conflict takes two. I
Yeah,
do think there can be an instigator and somebody that can escalate it on the other side. I think it was part of what we were trying to figure out about everything, right? So Dania's being very gracious right now when she talks about the rules. It was like a 6-page contract that we had her sign when she came to live with us. And we were just trying to we didn't know what to do as parents. We didn't know how to help this adult child through this very scary, it was scary for all of us. And so we thought, okay, well, we're going to, set up this contract. If she's going to live with us, these are the things she has to do to stay healthy. And it was just funny because Dad found that contract on an old computer he was looking through the other day. And he was like, oh my God, like I was reading through it. We were like kind of hardcore. And I'm like, yeah, but remember, we would slowly drop one off, I think by the end it was whittled down to just a few things. But the point I want to make with that is that the conflict was inevitable because the disease, your health had things that it was causing in your behaviors that made us not trust you, made us scared for you, made us want to know where you were at. Like we didn't have control either. And so it's like back to that control thing. And I talk about in this podcast how I'm a recovering control freak, because I learned really through going through our journey that there was so little I had control of. And so I do honor, and thank you for, owning some of the conflict, but I do think the conflict was inevitable. And I want people that are listening to this to know that there's gonna be conflict if you're dealing with or struggling with these issues, because it's scary, it's unknown territory. There's not one book out there that gives you all the direct solutions for any of it. I mean, they give you ideas, they give you, different things that you can try and execute within your family dynamic. And it's not black and white. Everybody's different. Even like you talked about the medications and that whole crazy time. So I love that you can see about the control piece of it, because your body was out of control. Like it was just like, I don't even know, the thoughts were out of control and all that stuff. So I want to go into what you were talking about. You came home, we had all that, the frozen yogurt fight, frozen yogurt gate.
Yeah.
So then you went and I think we kind of mutually agreed that this is not healthy for any of us, because it was not allowing us to have our best relationship with you. So then what happened next?
Well, I would like to speak more on that. Like I had a psychologist tell me that just because we're not compatible roommates doesn't mean that we're not compatible. And I think that has allowed us to kind of heal our relationship as mom and daughter, father and daughter and all that, because I think I was holding a grudge over the living situation for a while. And I realized we just kind of have different lifestyles, and that is a-okay, but I moved in with my best friend's parents. I remember going to breakfast with my best friend and his mom, and I was thinking about figuring out a new living situation, but I didn't know what that was going to look like at all. But while I was there, Josh was talking about how he was moving out and there was going to be an open room in the house. And I was kind of just eating breakfast, and I was like, I feel really comfortable around these people already. And I was like, and I think that this is something that, they could possibly say yes to. And I got the courage at breakfast to just be like, hey, would it be something that you could run by, your husband, to see if maybe I could move in with you guys, while I'm going to school. And I think within that 2 months, I ended up moving in with them. And I think that was really the start of when I started to get better. I kind of had to redevelop my identity of who I was, because my emotions were different than I remember. I didn't like the same things that I liked before. I didn't even know what I liked anymore. I didn't know what brought me joy, or who I liked even being around. So learning those things all took place at the Mumford's house. And I had like a level of freedom and trust. And I do think that like being granted that level of trust and like freedom was an opportunity for me to kind of learn how to use it properly and be responsible.
That's really good. I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that. I've not heard you say that before, but yeah. Okay, light bulb moment for mom.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you. Yeah.
There was the safety net of like, if I do mess up, like there's still fallback. But they're also going to be real with me and tell me, hey, this probably isn't a good decision that you made, so kind of learning how to use responsibility to benefit my own life, and not just because people are telling me to be responsible. That was like a really good experience. And I think like kind of how I like almost like a coming of age moment for me. Like I learned how to be an adult, really. And I did end up moving in with like a boyfriend at the time, like after some time. And I think that like a year and a half or so was a good test on like how strong my mental health had become, because it was like a rougher relationship. But I never struggled with with my mental health. So like it wasn't I mean, I did like have struggles, but it wasn't to the level of, like where I became hopeless or anything like that. I never became hopeless in that situation. And I also had this.
It was not a good relationship. I talked about last time how COVID was that was during the COVID time. So
Yeah.
Happenstance, like you started, you were dating this person, and then it was like, oh, you can only be in your people pod. So it just worked out that you ended up moving in with him, and it was a simpler time. So I think the simplicity was kind of good for your mental health anyways. But yet the relationship wasn't a good match, and not a healthy relationship, which you acknowledge.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think like once again, like any unhealthy situation, like you can take it as a lesson or you can be angry for life. And I kind of take it as like, okay, I learned what I don't want for my life, and I kind of figured out some of the things that I absolutely do want for my life from that situation. So I think that like was my first time really on my own, like in a house, no parents there. I mean, Harold and Lisa were still a form of parents,
Yeah.
So that was like the test on my responsibility too, like to see if I could keep it up and whatnot. And after that relationship, I moved back in with you guys. And I think that was probably the best us living together has gone.
Yeah, it was actually nice.
Yeah. I felt like I had matured, and I think that you had lost some of those control,
Fears,
like the need for
fear-based control.
yeah. And we lived and cohabitated very nicely, but yeah, I think that's kind of how that all worked out.
Well, I think that a lot was learned, and that's why I'm even here sharing this to the people that are interested, is that I'm in a place now that it's not so hard to share about it. Because you talked about that failure piece, and like as a parent, and Diane's talked about this, like that is the first we do as parents when we have a child suffering, like you or her son, where we go, oh, it's my fault. It's something I did. I was in the wrong. And there's some things I definitely could have done better with, Dad could have done better with, but we just didn't know. It's just like how you're talking about, to take that as a failure and be like, oh, okay, throw in the towel, never going to try again, or you learn from your failures and you don't use it as an excuse to just give up. And I like too, because I equate to the suicidal ideation piece you were talking about. It's basically quitting, right? And so quitting is not an option. So I do want to talk about today, as you wake up in the morning every day and go to work, some days are probably harder than others for you, as you still, it doesn't ever go away, right?
Right. Yeah. I think I've talked about it with you and Dad, like how I feel like I'm on a balance beam. Like my sanity is a balance beam that I very delicately walk on, and misstep feels like it could have drastic consequences sometimes. I do struggle. Like I have anxiety still. I get overwhelmed very easily. I still struggle with depression. Like there are some days where it's really easy to get up in the morning, and there are some days where I just feel like I got those cement shoes, strapped on, and I gotta like just drag my feet the entire way. But I think the difference is now that I recognize that whatever I'm feeling is temporary, So if I do feel depressed, that's temporary because I've obviously felt happy before, otherwise I wouldn't be feeling so low right now and like feeling like I'm missing out on my happiness. Like
Sure.
there's that recognition of like, everything that you're going through will pass. And I think for me, that looks like keeping a really strict routine. And even if I don't feel like doing what my routine says I should be doing, I still do it anyways, taking opposite action to like whatever unhealthy, toxic emotion or feeling or thought that I have has been like monumental in my healing because it's challenging your mental illness up front, saying
Sure.
like, you're actually wrong, depression. I can do this today. Like,
Yeah, you're basically talking smack to it then.
Yeah.
So how did you learn all that? How did you learn like these techniques? Was this through therapy? Have you read stuff? Have you watched video? Like, how do people learn what you've learned?
I read a lot of books. I had a really amazing psychologist, like my last few years of therapy. And she did a lot of dialectal behavioral therapy with me and cognitive behavioral therapy with me, which those really like are tools, or it is a collection of tools to challenge your negative thinking about yourself, So I learned that I was leading my life with the core belief that I'm a failure, not with the belief that I can succeed, And that was keeping me in a very stagnant place. And I felt stuck. Like I felt in my head, I believed that I was stuck where I was at. And I would tell people like, I feel like I'm in between a rock and a hard place. Like I can't get my footing to where I want to be. I don't even know where to start, and kind of challenging that with like, okay, like you don't have to know where to start. You just got to start, and then you'll figure out, if it's the right or wrong place to start through that,
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I learned that through cognitive behavioral therapy and DBT, and then also reading books. There's a book called Why Hasn't Anybody Told Me This Before? And it's a book written by a psychologist where she talks about different ways to, keep moving forward through life, even when things are hard. She does talk about like opposite action and how to do the opposite of what your negative thoughts are, to keep moving forward and prove yourself wrong, So those are, that's kind of how I got to that, and talking to people who have been sick. So
Yeah. We talked about the stigma of mental illness, and you and I've talked about like how like when you were really, really sick, like I was afraid, and even you were afraid. I think we even came up with the same thing. Like, I'm afraid you're going to be one of the people in downtown San Diego talking to a lamppost, like you know, like that is a real fear. Like you see these people that are so sick and they turn to, you know, unhealthy things or have burned so many bridges that they don't have the soft place to land, you know, as we've talked about in our household. So looking at that and kind of seeing the extreme of mental illness, it is sad, and it's part of why I think there is a stigma. We see this stuff that looks scary to us if we're on the trolley or we're downtown or something. And we then, you know, when I went and visited you at the hospital, like I saw the gamut of that, like the scary stuff, but I saw a lot more people that were like you, that were quietly suffering. And so the lens in which we see mental illness, I think as a society, we focus on the stuff that's the most scary looking to us. So it creates stigma, and then people are afraid to talk about it, or you're even afraid to admit you're ill. So how do we overcome that? How have you been able to speak so comfortably, to be on camera, to be on this podcast and talk about it without a fear? Or do you still have a fear, but you're like, I don't care, I'm going to do it?
Well, when I woke up this morning, I like literally told Abraham, I'm scared. Like I don't, I was like,
sure.
I'm nervous about doing it. So I do have fear about it. But I don't think it's based off of stigma. I think like my concern comes from like, if I'm gonna articulate my experience in a way that actually benefits people. So that's, I think, where my fear comes from. But I think people don't like to see suffering, and
Sure.
that's what it comes down to. And like it's physical health too. I mean, if somebody's like sick in the hospital, there's a level of discomfort that comes from visiting them, you know.
Mhm.
I will say that like I empathize with the people on the streets that are struggling with mental health, or you know, like you can tell just aren't there, you know, in the moment. uh because I felt not grounded. I think the difference between me and them is that I have family that supports me,
Sure.
and they are people that, you know, maybe they did burn bridges, um, but like maybe their family's not as forgiving as you guys were, you know? Um, so I think that like if my setting were different, like that is a possibility that I could end up like that person, because without the access to therapy or mental health services that I had, you know, I think that it is a very real reality that I could have chosen some very unhealthy coping mechanisms and ended up in a place like that, you know. I've watched friends go through it, and I can empathize with that. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate that you have been a source and a guide to others that have admitted their suffering and disclose that to you, because they feel like you're a safe person. And that's just a beautiful thing. And that's, I guess, through our suffering as a family and what you went through. And I said it at the very beginning, you know, through tears, and I'm gonna almost cry now, is that we're going to do something with this, D. You know, this is
Mhm.
going to help other people in some way, because we are brave and courageous enough to put ourselves out there, you know, and possibly face judgment or criticisms or whatever it may be. And we will put that aside, because that's the least of my worries. I'm more worried about getting the message out, having people hear something that's hopeful, and know
Mhm.
that there is those resources available. At the beginning of the recording, I gave a number for you to call if you're suffering with mental illness or addiction, or know somebody that's suffering, as a starting point for resources, but there's local resources as well. And so with that, I think I'm going to close. I don't know if you have any closing comments or any thoughts.
I do have one thing,
Yeah.
just because, like, I will say that in my healing, I've noticed that my behaviors don't always match my emotions. So even if my routine looks good, I still may be feeling depressed. But I always say it like, you can light the candle, it doesn't mean that you automatically feel relaxed. Just know that like if you continue to keep up with taking care of yourself, your body and your mind, you will start to feel better.
Thank you. And you've done the work clearly and continue to do the work on a daily basis. And you know all the things you need to do to keep yourself healthy. And that's a beautiful thing. That's not everybody can figure that out. So at 24 years of age, I think you're doing pretty awesome. I think I tell you on the regular, you're rocking life right now. And that doesn't mean you're making millions of dollars or doing, you know, these like grand things every single day. You're just really an overcomer. You're brave, you're courageous, and you're one of my heroes. I say it all the time. I have a list of real life heroes, and you're one of them. And I want to thank you. And you know, I love you. I used to wonder if you knew that, but I know that you know that now. And so with that, I'm going to close. Next time, Diane is going to be sharing with her son, Jake, and their journey. And it's about the addiction journey and how to overcome that. And sometimes it goes hand in hand with mental illness, and it can be a challenge, but there is hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel. There's real life stories out there that we will inspire you with. So remember to be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and sprinkle it everywhere like glitter. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you.